The desert wind carried death that morning as Captain Sarah Lightning Rodriguez gripped the controls of her A-10 Thunderbolt II. Below her, somewhere in the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Kunar province, SEAL Team 6 was supposed to be executing a routine extraction mission. But nothing about this day would be routine. Sarah had been flying close air support missions for 3 years, but she'd never worked directly with the legendary SEAL Team 6. These weren't just any Navy SEALs. They were the elite of the elite, the same unit that had taken down Osama bin Laden. When her squadron commander briefed her on the mission that morning, his face was grim. Intelligence suggested a high-value target was hiding in a compound near the Pakistani border, and Team 6 had been tasked with capture or elimination. The mission had started before dawn. 12 SEALs had been inserted via helicopter under cover of darkness, their target a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch, circling high above in her heavily armored attack aircraft, ready to rain down 30mm cannon fire if the team encountered resistance. For the first 2 hours, everything went according to plan. The SEALs had approached the compound silently, neutralized the sentries, and begun their systematic search. Sarah monitored their radio chatter, hearing the calm, professional voices of operators who had done this hundreds of times before. Team leader, Lieutenant Commander Mike Diesel Thompson, kept his communications brief and efficient, updating their progress as they cleared room after room. Then everything went wrong at once. The target wasn't in the compound, it was a trap. Hidden fighters emerged from concealed positions in the surrounding hills, opening fire with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. The SEALs found themselves pinned down in a concrete building, taking heavy fire from 3 directions. Worse yet, enemy reinforcements were already moving toward their position from the nearby village. Sarah heard the tension creep into Diesel's voice as he called for immediate close air support. The team was outnumbered at least 4-1, with more enemy fighters arriving every minute. Their extraction helicopter couldn't land under such intense fire, and the nearest coalition ground forces were over an hour away. The SEALs were on their own, trapped in what military planners called a kill box. As Sarah banked her aircraft toward the firefight, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the hillsides like deadly fireworks. The enemy had chosen their ambush site well. The compound sat in a valley with limited escape routes, surrounded by high ground that provided perfect firing positions. It was a classic kill zone, and Team 6 had walked right into it. The radio crackled with urgent voices as the SEALs coordinated their defense. They had taken casualties. At least 2 men were wounded, including their medic. Ammunition was running low, and the enemy was pressing closer with each passing minute. Sarah could hear the desperation beginning to creep into their usually calm communications. This was supposed to be a quick in-and-out operation, but now it had become a fight for survival. The most elite fighting unit in the world was pinned down and bleeding, with their extraction becoming more unlikely by the minute. As Sarah dove toward the battlefield, her finger hovering over the trigger of her 30mm GAU-8 cannon, she knew that the next few minutes would determine whether these warriors made it home alive. The Taliban fighters below had no idea that death was screaming toward them at 400 miles per hour. Piloted by a woman who had never lost a soldier under her protection, they had claimed that SEAL Team 6 was finished, trapped in their carefully planned kill zone. They were about to learn that they had made a terrible mistake. Sarah's A-10 Thunderbolt screamed down from the sky like an angel of death, its twin engines roaring as she lined up her first attack run. Below her, she could see the muzzle flashes from enemy positions scattered across the hillsides, at least 30 fighters closing in on the compound where Team 6 was making their desperate stand. The SEAL team's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Diesel's voice came through her headset, calm but urgent. 2 of his men were badly wounded, including Petty Officer First Class Danny Prophet Martinez, the team's explosives expert who had taken shrapnel to his leg and arm. Their corpsman, Hospital Corpsman Second Class James Doc Wilson, was treating casualties while simultaneously returning fire through a shattered window. Sarah had trained for moments like this, but the reality was far more intense than any simulation. She had to be precise. One mistake could kill the very people she was trying to save. The enemy fighters were close to the SEAL position, some within 50 meters of the building. Her 30mm cannon could tear through concrete and steel, but it could just as easily kill friendlies if her aim was off by even a few feet. She rolled her aircraft into a steep dive, the A-10's distinctive silhouette cutting through the morning sky. The Thunderbolt wasn't built for speed or elegance. It was built around its massive cannon, a flying gun designed to destroy tanks and fortified positions. As she approached her target, Sarah could see enemy fighters scrambling for cover, some firing wildly at her aircraft with small arms. The distinctive sound of the A-10 Avenger cannon erupted across the battlefield, a thunderous brrrt that struck fear into enemy hearts worldwide. 30mm depleted uranium rounds ripped through the hillside at 4,200 rounds per minute, turning rock and dirt into clouds of deadly fragments. The enemy position on the eastern ridge disappeared in a shower of debris and smoke, but there were too many targets and not enough time. Even as Sarah climbed away from her first pass, she could see more fighters emerging from hidden caves and crevices in the rocky terrain. Intelligence had seriously underestimated the enemy's strength in this area. What was supposed to be a quick capture mission had become a full-scale battle against a well-prepared enemy force. Diesel's team was running low on ammunition, and their defensive perimeter was shrinking with each enemy assault. The Taliban fighters were using classic infantry tactics, suppressing the SEALs with heavy fire while moving assault teams closer to the building. Some had already reached the compound's outer walls and were preparing to breach the main structure. Sarah coordinated with an AC-130 gunship that had just arrived on station, but the Spooky couldn't engage targets so close to friendly forces. The precision required was beyond even the AC-130's sophisticated sensors. This fight would come down to her aircraft and her skills alone. As she set up for her second attack run, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. A large group of fighters was moving through a ravine on the northern side of the compound. At least 20 men with heavy weapons, including what appeared to be a recoilless rifle that could punch through the building's walls like paper. The SEALs were fighting brilliantly, but they were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Prophet was still in the fight despite his wounds, using his remaining explosives to collapse doorways and create choke points. Doc Wilson had taken over a machine gun position after the gunner was wounded, laying down suppressive fire that kept the enemy from making a coordinated assault. Sarah dove again, this time targeting the ravine where the heavy weapons team was advancing. Her cannon rounds walked through the narrow passage like a deadly zipper, but she could see that more enemy fighters were still moving toward the compound from multiple directions. The Taliban had clearly planned this ambush for weeks, positioning fighters in caves and bunkers throughout the area. Time was running out. The SEALs had been in contact for over an hour, and their ammunition situation was becoming critical. Worse yet, intelligence reports indicated that a much larger enemy force was moving toward the area, possibly over 100 fighters with vehicles and heavy weapons. If Team 6 didn't extract soon, they would be completely overrun. As Sarah climbed away from her second attack run, she realized that conventional close air support wouldn't be enough to save the SEALs. The enemy was too well entrenched, and their numbers were too great. She was going to have to do something desperate, something that would risk everything to give the team a chance at survival. The impossible decision came down to physics and courage. Sarah had one chance to break the enemy's stranglehold on SEAL Team 6, but it would require flying her A-10 Thunderbolt through a gauntlet of enemy fire at treetop level, closer to the ground than any sane pilot would attempt in combat. She had spotted the enemy's main staging area, a cluster of buildings and vehicles hidden in a valley, about 2 kilometers from the compound where the SEALs were trapped. Intelligence intercepts revealed this was where the Taliban commander was coordinating the attack, bringing in reinforcements and heavy weapons. If she could destroy that staging area, it might buy the SEALs enough time for extraction, but the approach required flying through a narrow mountain pass where enemy fighters had positioned anti-aircraft weapons. Sarah had already seen rocket-propelled grenades streaking past her aircraft during her previous attack runs. Flying low through that pass would make her an easy target for every fighter with an RPG or heavy machine gun. Diesel's voice came through her headset, strained but determined. The enemy was preparing for a final assault on the compound. They had brought up what sounded like a mortar, and the first rounds were already impacting near the building. The SEALs had maybe 10 minutes before the structure became uninhabitable. Sarah made her choice. Banking her aircraft into a steep turn, She dropped to barely 100 feet above the ground, racing toward the mountain pass at full throttle. The A-10's twin engines screamed as she pushed the aircraft to its limits, flying so low that she could see individual enemy fighters diving for cover below her. The pass opened before her like the mouth of hell. Tracer fire lit up the narrow canyon as dozens of fighters opened up with everything they had. Sarah felt her aircraft shudder as small arms fire peppered the armored fuselage. But the A-10 was built to take punishment. Designed to survive in the most hostile environments, the Thunderbolt kept flying even as rounds sparked off its titanium armor. An RPG streaked past her cockpit, missing by mere feet. Another exploded against the canyon wall, showering her aircraft with rock fragments. Sarah held her course, threading the needle between the towering stone walls while enemy fighters poured fire at her from every conceivable angle. Then she burst through the pass and saw her target spread out below. Trucks, weapons caches, and command bunkers nestled in a hidden valley. This was the nerve center of the ambush, the place where the Taliban had planned what they thought would be the destruction of America's most elite fighting unit. Sarah rolled her aircraft into a vertical dive, the ground rushing toward her at terrifying speed. She had seconds to line up her shot before she would have to pull out or impact the valley floor. Her targeting system locked onto the largest building, clearly a command bunker built into the hillside. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life, sending a stream of depleted uranium rounds into the enemy position at point-blank range. The command bunker erupted in a massive explosion as stored ammunition and fuel ignited simultaneously. The blast was so intense that Sarah felt the shockwave rock her aircraft even as she pulled out of her dive. Secondary explosions rippled across the valley as weapons caches and fuel dumps detonated in a chain reaction. Trucks and equipment disappeared in clouds of fire and smoke. The carefully planned Taliban staging area was being obliterated in a matter of seconds, but Sarah wasn't finished. Banking hard to the left, she lined up on a convoy of reinforcements that had just arrived at the valley entrance. These were the fighters who were supposed to deliver the killing blow to Team 6, armed with heavy machine guns and recoilless rifles. Her cannon found them before they could scatter. The lead truck disintegrated under the hail of 30mm rounds, while the vehicles behind it swerved wildly trying to escape. Some fighters abandoned their vehicles and ran for the hills, but there was nowhere to hide from the A-10's devastating firepower. As Sarah climbed away from the valley, she could see the full extent of the destruction she had caused. What had been a busy staging area 5 minutes earlier was now a smoking crater filled with twisted metal and burning debris. The Taliban's carefully orchestrated ambush had been shattered in a single devastating attack, but the mission wasn't over yet. Radio reports indicated that some enemy fighters were still in contact with Team 6, though their numbers had been drastically reduced. The mortar fire had stopped, and the pressure on the compound was easing, but Diesel and his men were still trapped and running low on ammunition. Sarah checked her fuel gauge and weapon status. She had enough cannon rounds for one more major engagement, and her fuel would allow her to remain on station for another 30 minutes. The question was whether that would be enough time to get the SEALs out alive. As she banked toward the compound for what might be her final attack run, she could hear Diesel coordinating with the extraction helicopter that was finally inbound to their position. The extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon like salvation itself, but Sarah knew the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. Getting the SEALs out of the compound would require precision timing and overwhelming firepower to suppress any remaining enemy fighters who might target the vulnerable aircraft during landing. Diesel's voice crackled through the radio, coordinating the extraction with military efficiency despite the chaos around him. 2 of his men were seriously wounded and would need immediate medical attention. Prophet could barely walk on his shrapnel-torn leg, while another SEAL, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Tank Rodriguez, had taken a rifle round through his shoulder but was still fighting. The extraction helicopter was a CH-47 Chinook, call sign Dustoff 77, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Banshee Chang, one of the most experienced combat pilots in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. But even the best pilot in the world couldn't land safely if enemy fighters had clear shots at the aircraft. Sarah coordinated with Banshee, identifying the remaining threat positions around the compound. Despite her devastating attack on the staging area, approximately 15 enemy fighters were still in contact, scattered among the rocks and crevices surrounding the building. Some had taken cover in positions that would give them direct lines of fire on any helicopter attempting to land. The landing zone was a small clearing behind the compound, barely large enough for the massive Chinook. Diesel and his team would have to move their wounded across 50 meters of open ground, while under potential enemy fire. It was a dangerous proposition, but staying in the compound was no longer an option. The building had taken significant damage from mortar fire and small arms, and structural collapse was becoming a real possibility. Sarah began her suppression run, targeting known enemy positions with surgical precision. Her cannon rounds walked through the rocks where muzzle flashes had been spotted, turning solid stone into clouds of deadly fragments. She had to be careful not to hit areas where the SEALs might move during their dash to the landing zone. The Chinook made its approach from the south, flying low and fast to minimize exposure time. Banshee was an artist at the controls, threading her massive aircraft between the canyon walls while Sarah provided cover fire. The helicopter's door gunners added their own firepower, M240 machine guns chattering as they suppressed enemy positions. Diesel gave the signal, and Team 6 began their fighting withdrawal from the compound. Doc Wilson and another SEAL carried Prophet between them, while Tank provided covering fire despite his wounded shoulder. The team moved with practiced efficiency, bounding from cover to cover while maintaining fields of fire to protect their wounded teammates. An enemy fighter emerged from a hidden position, raising an RPG launcher toward the approaching helicopter. Sarah spotted him immediately and adjusted her aim, sending a burst of cannon fire that eliminated the threat before he could fire. The explosion of her rounds against the rock sent a clear message to any other fighters considering similar actions. The Chinook touched down in the landing zone, its rotors whipping up clouds of dust and debris. The helicopter's crew chief, Staff Sergeant Maria Iron Santos, had the cargo ramp down before the aircraft fully settled, ready to receive the wounded SEALs and get them aboard as quickly as possible. Diesel's team reached the helicopter in less than 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Enemy fire continued to pepper the area around the landing zone, rounds sparking off rocks and whining through the air. Sarah continued her protective circle overhead, ready to engage any threat that presented itself. Prophet was loaded onto the helicopter first, followed by Tank and the other wounded SEAL. The rest of the team provided security as Doc Wilson began emergency medical treatment in the aircraft's cargo bay. These men had trained together for years, and their coordination under fire was flawless. But as the Chinook began to lift off, Sarah spotted movement in the rocks to the north of the landing zone. A group of enemy fighters had worked their way into a position where they could engage the helicopter as it climbed out of the valley. She could see the distinctive shape of an RPG launcher among them, along with what appeared to be a heavy machine gun. Sarah didn't hesitate. Rolling her aircraft into a steep dive, she dove directly at the enemy position, her cannon spooling up for what might be her final engagement of the battle. The enemy fighters saw her coming and scattered, but there wasn't enough time or cover to save them from the A-10's devastating firepower. Her cannon rounds impacted the rocky outcropping in a series of thunderous explosions, obliterating the threat before it could engage the departing helicopter. As she pulled out of her dive, Sarah watched the Chinook disappear over the ridge, carrying SEAL Team 6 to safety and medical treatment. The battlefield fell quiet for the first time in hours. The Taliban's carefully planned ambush had failed completely, their forces scattered and their leadership eliminated. What was supposed to be a crushing defeat for America's elite warriors had instead become a testament to their courage and the devastating effectiveness of close air support. 3 hours after the last shot was fired, Sarah finally touched down at Bagram Air Base, her A-10 Thunderbolt scarred but victorious. The aircraft bore the wounds of battle, dozens of bullet holes in the fuselage, shrapnel damage to the wings, and a cracked canopy where an enemy round had come dangerously close to finding its mark. But the Warthog had lived up to its reputation, bringing her home despite taking punishment that would have destroyed lesser aircraft. As Sarah shut down the engines and began her post-flight inspection, word of the mission was already spreading throughout the base. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Taliban staging area had been completely destroyed, with over 40 enemy fighters killed or wounded. More importantly, all 12 members of SEAL Team 6 had been successfully extracted, with the wounded already receiving treatment at the base hospital. Colonel James Hammer Mitchell, Sarah's squadron commander, was waiting for her on the flight line. A veteran of Desert Storm and Iraqi freedom, Hammer had seen plenty of combat. But the intensity of this morning's mission had impressed even him. The real-time intelligence feeds had allowed him to follow every moment of the battle, watching as Sarah had single-handedly broken the enemy's ambush and saved an entire SEAL team. The debriefing took place in the squadron's secure briefing room, where Sarah walked through every detail of the engagement with intelligence officers and mission planners. Her gun camera footage would be studied for weeks, analyzed for lessons learned and tactical innovations. The low-level attack through the mountain pass was already being called one of the most daring close air support missions of the war. But for Sarah, the mission wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about the 12 warriors she had helped bring home alive. As she completed her debriefing, she learned that Prophet and Tank were both stable and would make full recoveries. The quick action by Doc Wilson during the extraction had likely saved Prophet's life, stopping massive bleeding from his leg wound while under fire. Later that evening, Sarah was surprised to find Diesel waiting for her outside the base exchange. The SEAL team leader had cleaned up and changed into fresh utilities, but she could still see the exhaustion in his eyes. Combat took a toll on everyone, no matter how elite or experienced they might be. Diesel extended his hand, and when Sarah shook it, she felt something pressed into her palm. Looking down, she saw a small piece of metal, a fragment from one of her own 30mm cannon rounds, recovered from the battlefield where it had eliminated an enemy machine gun position. The SEAL's words were simple, but carried enormous weight in the special operations community. He told her that she had given his team something more valuable than any medal or commendation. She had given them their lives back. In the Brotherhood of Special Operations, there was no higher honor than being trusted to protect those who protect others. Word of the mission reached the highest levels of command within days. General David Petraeus himself, then commanding International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, sent a personal commendation recognizing Sarah's actions. The citation praised her tactical brilliance, flying skill, and the courage required to execute such a dangerous low-level attack. But perhaps more meaningful was the response from the SEAL community itself. Team 6 members who had served with Diesel began reaching out, wanting to know more about the pilot who had saved their teammates. In a community known for its secrecy and selective trust, Sarah had earned something that couldn't be taught or awarded: the absolute respect of America's most elite warriors. The tactical innovations from the mission began appearing in training, manuals, and academic studies. Military analysts praised the coordination between air and ground forces, the precision targeting in close proximity to friendly troops, and the creative problem-solving that had turned a potential disaster into a complete victory. Sarah's aircraft was repaired and returned to service, but not before maintenance crews had painted 12 small silhouettes below the cockpit, one for each SEAL whose life had been saved. It was an unofficial modification that violated several regulations, but no one in the chain of command was inclined to order its removal. The Taliban propaganda machine, which had planned to use the destruction of SEAL Team 6 as a major victory, was forced to explain how their carefully planned ambush had instead resulted in the death of a senior commander and the destruction of a major weapons cache. The failed operation became a symbol of American air power and the futility of trying to trap elite special operations forces. For Sarah, the mission represented everything she had trained for throughout her career. Every hour in the simulator, every training exercise, every study session had prepared her for those crucial moments when the lives of fellow warriors hung in the balance. She had proven that skill, courage, and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. 6 months after the mission that made her a legend in special operations circles, Sarah found herself facing an unexpected challenge. The Pentagon had selected her for a new assignment that would take her away from combat operations and into the world of military training and doctrine development. They wanted her to help design new tactics for close air support missions, sharing her hard-won experience with the next generation of pilots. The assignment meant leaving Afghanistan and her squadron behind, but it also represented recognition of her expertise at the highest levels. Sarah would be working directly with Special Operations Commands to develop training scenarios based on real-world missions. including the SEAL Team 6 extraction that had become a case study in military academies worldwide. Her final mission in Afghanistan was bittersweet. Flying one last patrol over the same terrain where she had saved Diesel's team, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that desperate morning 6 months earlier. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban activity in the area had dropped significantly, partly due to the loss of leadership and resources in her devastating attack on their staging area. Prophet had returned to full duty after months of rehabilitation, his legs stronger than ever despite the extensive damage it had suffered. Tank had also made a complete recovery, the shoulder wound leaving only a small scar that he wore with pride. Both SEALs had requested to serve with units that would keep them in Afghanistan, determined to continue the fight against the enemies who had nearly killed them. The farewell ceremony at Bagram was attended by special operations personnel from across the theater. Diesel and several members of his team had flown in specifically to see Sarah off, a gesture that spoke volumes about the bonds forged in combat. The SEAL community rarely showed such public appreciation, but Sarah's actions had earned her a permanent place in their brotherhood. During the ceremony, Sarah was presented with several commendations, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and an Air Force Cross for extraordinary heroism. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The families of the SEALs she had saved had sent letters, thanking her for bringing their husbands and fathers home alive. One letter particularly moved her, written by Prophet's 8-year-old daughter Sophia. In careful handwriting, the little girl had drawn a picture of an airplane protecting soldiers on the ground, with the words "Thank you for saving my daddy" written in crayon below. That drawing would find a place of honor on Sarah's wall, more precious than any medal. The transition to her new role at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada was challenging but rewarding. Sarah found herself working with some of the most experienced combat pilots in the Air Force, developing training scenarios that would prepare future aviators for the challenges they would face downrange. Her mission recordings and tactical analysis became required study material for close air support courses. She also began working closely with special operations units, participating in joint training exercises that tested the limits of air-ground cooperation. The lessons learned from the SEAL Team 6 mission influenced everything from communication protocols to weapon employment techniques, making American Special Operations Forces even more effective in combat. One of Sarah's most important contributions was developing new training scenarios for female pilots entering combat roles. As one of the most decorated female combat pilots in the Air Force, she became a mentor and role model for women seeking to excel in previously male-dominated fields. Her success demonstrated that skill and courage were not determined by gender, but by dedication and training. The academic study of her mission continued to yield insights years after the actual event. Military historians analyzed every aspect of the engagement, from the initial intelligence failure that led to the ambush to the innovative tactics that turned defeat into victory. The mission became a textbook example of how individual initiative and tactical flexibility could overcome superior enemy numbers. International military observers also took notice, with Allied air forces requesting briefings on the tactics and techniques that had made the mission successful. Sarah found herself presenting to audiences from Britain, Australia, Canada, and other coalition partners, sharing American expertise while learning from their own combat experiences. The ripple effects of that single morning's work continued to spread throughout the special operations community. New protocols were established for close air support missions. Equipment was modified based on lessons learned, and training programs were updated to incorporate the tactical innovations that had emerged from the life-or-death situation over Afghanistan. For Sarah, the true measure of success wasn't found in commendations or career advancement, but in the knowledge that her actions had made a real difference in the lives of warriors and their families. Every successful mission that used tactics derived from her experience, every pilot who flew safer because of lessons she had shared, represented a continuation of the oath she had taken to support and defend those who served alongside her. 5 years after the mission that changed everything, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy, facing hundreds of young cadets who represented the future of American military aviation. Her presentation on combat leadership and tactical decision-making had become one of the most requested lectures in the Academy's curriculum, drawing standing-room-only crowds whenever she spoke. The cadets listened in rapt attention as Sarah walked them through the critical moments of the SEAL Team 6 extraction, emphasizing the importance of training, teamwork, and the split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. She spoke without notes. The details of that morning burned permanently into her memory, but her focus was always on the lessons rather than the glory. In the audience sat Cadet First Class Rebecca Martinez, Prophet's daughter Sophia, now 18 years old and following in the footsteps of the woman who had saved her father's life. Sophia had grown up hearing stories about the pilot who had risked everything to bring Daddy home, and those stories had inspired her own dream of becoming a combat aviator. Her acceptance to the Air Force Academy represented the completion of a circle that had begun in the mountains of Afghanistan. After the presentation, Sophia approached Sarah with a familiar mixture of nervousness and determination. She carried with her the same crayon drawing she had made as a child, now carefully preserved and framed, the picture of an airplane protecting soldiers that had meant so much to Sarah over the years. But Sophia also carried something new, her father's SEAL trident, given to her as a graduation gift, with instructions to present it to the woman who had made his continued service possible. The exchange was witnessed by dozens of cadets and faculty members, but it felt intimate and personal. Sarah accepted the trident with hands that had learned steadiness under fire, understanding the enormous significance of the gesture. In the special operations community, few honors carried more weight than the gift of a warrior's own insignia, representing ultimate trust and respect. Diesel had retired from active duty after 22 years of service, but he maintained close relationships with the operators he had led through countless missions. He had specifically traveled to Colorado Springs to witness this moment, watching as the daughter of one of his saved teammates honored the pilot who had made it all possible. For him, it represented the continuity of service that defined the military community, each generation building on the sacrifices and achievements of those who came before. Sarah's own career had evolved far beyond that single mission, though it remained the defining moment of her service. She had commanded squadrons, led international training exchanges, and helped design the next generation of close air support aircraft. Her expertise was sought by defense contractors developing new weapon systems and by military planners designing future combat operations. But perhaps her greatest contribution was the network of pilots she had trained and mentored throughout her career. Dozens of aviators who had learned from her were now serving in combat zones around the world, carrying forward the lessons of precision, courage, and dedication to those they protected. Each successful mission they flew represented a multiplication of the impact she had made that morning over Afghanistan. The original members of SEAL Team 6 had scattered to various assignments, but they maintained the tight bonds forged in combat. Prophet had become an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, passing on his expertise to new generations of SEALs. Tank had moved into intelligence work, using his combat experience to better understand and counter terrorist threats. Doc Wilson had left active duty to become a physician's assistant, but remained in the reserves, ready to serve when needed. All of them carried with them the memory of that desperate morning when everything had gone wrong, and the sound of salvation approaching in the form of an A-10 Thunderbolt screaming across the sky. The mission had become part of SEAL legend, told and retold in training centers and operational briefings, as an example of what was possible when warriors supported each other without reservation. The broader impact of the mission extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. The tactics and techniques developed during that engagement had influenced military doctrine worldwide, making coalition special operations forces more effective and safer in their missions. The lessons of precision targeting, risk assessment, and tactical flexibility had been incorporated into training programs across multiple services and allied nations. As Sarah concluded her presentation to the Air Force cadets, she emphasized the theme that had guided her entire career: service to others. The greatest honor any warrior could achieve was not personal recognition or career advancement, but the knowledge that their actions had preserved the lives of fellow service members and contributed to the security of those they had sworn to protect. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just appreciation for an inspiring speech, but recognition of a life dedicated to the highest ideals of military service. In a world where headlines too often focused on failure and controversy, Sarah's story represented the thousands of quiet heroes who served with distinction, making split-second decisions under impossible pressure and living with the consequences of their choices. The mission that had made Sarah a legend was ultimately about something more fundamental than tactics or technology. It was about the unbreakable bonds between warriors who trusted each other with their lives, and the courage to risk everything for those bonds when the moment demanded it.